It is an incredible schus to Meretz Hashem be able to at least continue to learn together virtually. So we are continuing today's daf, Kesuvos, Daf Dalid Amud Aleph. And actually we're starting, today's daf is Daf Dalid. We are starting in Meretz Hashem on Gimel Amud Beis. So 3b. So let's pick up Rabbosai from 4 lines up from the bottom. B by Sema. So the Gemara is commenting on the Braisa. And the Gemara says as follows, Z by Sema, Mein Machmas Ha'ones. What does it mean when the Braisa said before that if there's an extenuating circumstance, an ones, then one could potentially even push a wedding up even a bit earlier? What's the case of ones? Kidisanyo. Harishahaya pita afui. Utevacho tavuach v'yeno mazik. Listen to this interesting case. Let's see the following situation. Chassan and Kala, Reuven and Rachel are ready to get married. And everything is prepared. Quite literally, the bread was baked. The meat was slaughtered. The wine was already mixed and diluted. Umeis aviv shal chassan u'imo shal kala. And unfortunately, the father of the chassan or the mother of the kala passes away. What's the halacha? And we'll explain the reason. Let's talk about first what the halacha is, then we'll explain the reason for it. So the Gemara says, So the Gemara says the halacha is machnisin es hameis lecheder ve'es hachasan ve'es hakala lechuppah. So we do something amazing. Whereas normally we are so makbid, we are so careful with kavod hameis. In a situation like this, what we do is halacha lamaisa. We go ahead and we place the mace. We put the corpse into a room, and we take the chassan and kala to the chuppah. In other words, we allow the chassan and kala to get married, and we delay the levaya. Of Dalad Amud Aleph, Ubol Bi'ilas Mitzvah, we allow the chassan and kala to be together on the wedding night. So they do the Bi'as Mitzvah, the initial act of physically consummating their marriage, Uporish, and ultimately then they have to separate. Now Rashi adds in a very important concept over here, Uporish, V'yikberu es hameis miyad. So again, the order of things is like this. So listen to this case. Reuven and Rachel are about to be married. Mamish, all the preparations are made. The day of the chasana. What happens? Father of the chassan, mother of the kala passes away. The halacha is, literally, we move the mace to the side. Quite literally, we put the mace in a room, take the chassan and kala to the chuppah, let them get married. Be a rishona, the first act of relations is permitted, and then ultimately they must separate from each other. Again, we'll come back to Rashi in just a moment. V'noeg shivas yimei hamishta. They go ahead and they have sheva brachas. V'achar kach noeg shivas yimei abelus. And afterwards, then they have the 7 days of shiva. V'chol osan hayamim, and all of those days. Now, all of those days we're going to see refers to the 7 days of sheva brachas, as well as the 7 days of abelus. Hu yashen bein ha'anoshim, v'hi yashena bein ha'noshim. He sleeps with the men, she sleeps with the women, i.e., they do not sleep in the same room together. So there's a lot of stuff going on over here. So first, if I take a look at Rashi, back to Rashi Uporesh, Rashi says, v'yikberu es hameis miyad. D'chivon d'chal alav chasino havi l'gabei keregel, v'lo asya avelos v'chel l'benoig shivas yamish. Something amazing happens. So once again, the order is, take the chassan and kala to the chuppah, put the mace in a room. Right after the chuppah, then we do the levaya. We bury the dead. Now, what's interesting about this is as follows. Because once there was chuppah, then already the concept of sheva brachas. And sheva brachas are going to see the 7 days of celebration for a chassan and kala after they get married. Those 7 days have the status of a yom tiv. We'll see where that comes from. But once the yom tiv status devolves upon the chassan and kala, the fact that you bury the dead can't trigger avelos until after sheva brachas is over. So you're going to have 14 days. First 7 days of sheva brachas, next 7 days ultimately of avelos. Now you understand, we can't bury the mother of the chassan, the mother of the kala, the father of the chassan before the chasana. Because if you bury the deceased parent before the chuppah, then ultimately, again, that'll trigger avelos, mourning for the chassan and the kala, which would then preclude the chuppah from occurring. So what we do is we do the chuppah first. Once you do the chuppah, they're in sheva brachas. Sheva brachas has the status of like a yom tiv. Then we bury the dead, and because they're in the middle of sheva brachas, avelos cannot start until sheva brachas is over. So go ahead, finish up sheva brachas, then 7 days of avelos. Next halacha, during those 14 days, Rashi points out over here, both the 7 days of sheva brachas as well as the 7 days of avelos, chassan and kala, it appears, cannot be alone with each other. So chassan has to sleep with the men. Sleeping with the men, sleeping with the women, it doesn't have to be literal. What it just means is they're not allowed to be alone with each other. The Gemara goes on. And we do not go ahead, even during Avelos, we do not go ahead and withhold cosmetics or jewelry from the kala. We'll get into this halacha as well, that there's a concept that we want to make sure that the kala, that the bride looks beautiful for her husband, and therefore, even though during Avelos, there are certain types of cosmetics or jewelry that a woman is not going to wear or going to apply, but halacha l'maisa, when it comes to a kala, we allow her to go ahead and put on her cosmetics and wear her jewelry even during the 30 days of mourning. Again, we'll see the halacha independently. So we'll say, let's analyze. The dafka, now here's what's interesting. The Brisa set this up as a case of what? The father of the chassan or the mother of the kala. And now the Gemara says, V'dafka, aviv shal chassan or imam shal kala. The leka inish de tarich lehu. This is specific. It's Tafka, the father of the chassan or the mother of the kala. Why? Because these are the two individuals who really are the most involved from the respective side. The father of the chassan is the one who is helping with the wedding preparations, both materially and monetarily. The mother of the kala is the one who's taking care of the kala to make sure that she is prepared with her cosmetics, with her jewelry, with her clothing. So these are people who are indispensable parts of the wedding party. So halacha l'maisa, again, halacha l'maisa, that because they're no longer around, we have to do the chasana now. If we don't do the chasana now, there is a concern that either the chassan or the kala will not have the requisite means to be able to do the wedding at a later date. However, again, the Gemara says, aval ipcha lo. But I will say, if the reverse, let's say, for example, it was the mother of the chassan or the father of the kala. In that case, what we would actually do is we would tell the chassan and kala, delay the wedding, right? Bury the dead, sit Shiva, and then sometime after Shiva, sometime after Avelos, you'll go out and you'll get married. Why? Because there are people around who could help take care of the wedding needs even at a later date. But halacha l'maisa, now that we're talking about the father of the chassan, the mother of the kala, these are the people who really take care of the wedding needs. Again, if we delay the wedding now, who's to say chassan and kala will be able to go ahead and pull this off at a later date? Therefore, for these pivotal individuals, put the mace in a room, allow the chuppah to occur, be a rishona, they can't be alone with each other, bury the dead, 7 days of Sheva Brachas, 7 days of Shiva. So the Gemara says, Lo shanu ela shenasan mayim agabi basar. So now the Gemara goes in a little bit deeper. So what are we concerned about over here? The issue is really a financial one. They were concerned that since so much money and time and resources have gone into this wedding, that there's going to be a huge loss. And if the chassan and kala suffer this loss, who's to say they're going to be able to marshal up the resources to get married at a later date? So now the Gemara gives an interesting qualification of this. When is it true that we're about a significant loss, shenasan mayim agabe basar, where they already began to soak the meat? See, if you already put water on top of the meat, meaning you began the cooking process, so then you can't sell anything off, right? Because since you began the cooking process, either use it now or lose it. But if you have not yet put the water on top of the meat, mizdabin, ultimately, again, it can be sold. And halacha l'mais, you could recapture the loss. Remember, in any case where you could recapture the loss, then there'd be an obligation, or potential loss, there'd be an obligation to push off the wedding. Let me just clarify this piece once more. What's unfolding over here is that if we do not allow this chassan and kala to get married now, the concern is they're not going to have the financial means, nor will they have the necessary people to help arrange a wedding celebration in the future. So therefore, again, if it's the father of the chassan, the mother of the kala, let the chuppah go on, bury the dead afterwards. But if there's any other kind of circumstances, it's not the father of the chassan, mother of the kala, it's other people who died. Or for that matter, there's a way to salvage the food. You could sell off the food. So you could go ahead and bank the money and use it for later. Under those circumstances, you would bury the dead first, sit Shiva, Shloshim, whatever amount of mourning, and then get married at a later date. So the Gemara says, the truth is, if you live in a big city, a lot of people, in that case, even if you already placed the water on the meat, you could still sell it. Because Lamaisa, again, there's a market, there's a lot of people there. So there's no concern, there's always going to be a purchaser, so sell it off and do the wedding at a later date. Conversely, in a village, even if you did not put the water on top of the meat, you'd still be permitted to go forward with the wedding. Why? Because in a village there's fewer people. Also, people don't necessarily have the same degree of means. And so even if the water wasn't put on the meat, who's to say I'm going to find a buyer for meat in general? The Elo Rav Chisda Hechi Mishkach Aslo. So asks the Gemara, so halacha l'maisa, where do you find the case of Rav Chisda? So Rav Chisda said, Rav Chisda wanted to make the distinction between if you put the water on the meat or didn't put the water on the meat. If you put the water on the meat, it's going to represent the loss if you don't get married now, so go and do the chasana. But if you didn't put the water on the meat, ultimately it can be sold off. But again, it seems to be not as much an issue of water on the meat, not water on the meat, as much as a question of where do you live? Do you live in a village? Do you live in a big city? So the Gemara says, so where does Rav Chisda's criteria of water, not water, where does it come into play? A place like Masa Mechasya. What's unique about Masa Mechasya? The mafka mikrach mafka mikfar. Because Masa Mechasya is kind of in between. It's not a big city, but it's also not a village. So in a place like Masa Mechasya, the determinant is, did you already put the water on the meat? So if you already put the water on the meat, chances are you're not going to find a buyer so quickly. It's going to be a loss. Go forward with the chasana. If you didn't put the water on the meat, then ultimately, again, you can potentially find the buyer in order to go ahead and save the loss. Beautiful. Tanya Takavase Rav Chisda. You have a brayso that supports Rav Chisda. Harishaya pito afuya v'tivcho tavuach. If you already baked the bread for the chasana, you already slaughtered the meat, v'yeno mazug, and your wine was already diluted. V'nasan ma'im agabe basra. Here the brayso says, and you already put the water on top of the meat, and then umeis aviv shel chasan o imel shel kala. The father of the chasan or the mother of the kala passes away. So remember again, now you have all of the necessary ingredients, so to speak. The food is ready. The water is already on the meat. So again, if chasan kala doesn't get married, the food is a loss. The food is a loss. Not only that, who died? The father of the chasan or the mother of the kala. People who are absolutely necessary in order to make a wedding happen. And if we don't do the wedding now, who's to say there's going to be someone to help the chasan and kala get married at a later date? So what's the halacha? Machnisin es hameis lecheder. We take the corpse, we take the dead person, we put them in a room. Putting them in a room means we put them on the side. V'asa chasan v'asa kala l'chuppah. You go ahead and take the chasan and kala to the chuppah. Uboel bi'ilas mitzvah. And ultimately, again, they have their first act of relations. Uporesh, then they must separate. V'noeg shivas yemei hamishta, v'achakach noeg shivas yemei avelos. And ultimately, they observe 7 days of Sheva Brachos, 7 days of rejoicing, and then afterwards, 7 days of avelos. The chol osan hayamim, and all of those days, meaning, again, all of those days refers to 14 days. 7 days of Sheva Brachos, 7 days of Avelos. What's the halacha? Kolosan yamim hu yashin bein ha'anoshim v'ishto yeshena bein ha'anoshim. He sleeps with the men, she sleeps with the women. I.e., no yichud. They're not alone with each other. And I will say, the Gemara says, by the way, before we actually get to this, I'll mention something amazing. You know, it's fascinating if you think about a chasana like this. Think about a chasana like this, where here you have a tragic situation of the father of the chasan, mother of the kala, and yet the halacha says, get married. Get married. And I will say, you know, if you think about it, there's an incredible Musar Haskell in this, that sometimes in life, when things need to get done, they just need to get done. In other words, we all know there are always reasons why you can't accomplish something, and always reasons why you can't do something. And by the way, sometimes they're even legitimate reasons. I don't mean situations where you make up excuses. I mean sometimes there are legitimate reasons why I can't get things done. But halacha l'maisa and hashkafa l'maisa, when something is important and needs to happen, as they say, you need to make it rain. You need to make it happen. You need to somehow get it together and move yourself forward. And that's what's happening over here. Nebuch, this chasen and kala, they suffered a loss. I mean like a relationship loss, something significant. But lemaisa, now again, there's a marriage that has to take place. Because if it doesn't take place now, who knows what's going to happen in the future? So the halacha says, get it together and do what you have to do. And what an incredible lesson in life. Get it together and do what you have to do. When I know that something in life has to get done, even if there are legitimate reasons why I can't do it, it's too busy, it's inconvenient, if I know that it's something that has to get done, get it done. Incredible. So the Gemara goes on, we'll say another interesting case. Now, what it sounds like you're saying over here is as follows. Just like the chasan and kala who suffered the loss before the chasana, so we're going to delay burying the dead, go to the chuppah, be a rishona, Then they separate. He sleeps with the men, she sleeps with the women. Over the course of 14 days. 7 days of Sheva Brachas, 7 days of Avelos. The Gemara says the same halacha applies if a couple gets married and the wife becomes a nida. Now I will say, we're going to have to see exactly what this means. So Rashi says over here, we're talking about a case where she became a nida at the chuppah, or not literally at the chuppah, before the chuppah, meaning that they've never had a chance yet to consummate their relationship. So watch this. What's the halacha? He ishtoni, right? Hu yashem bein ha'anoshim v'hi yeshena bein ha'anoshim. So we'll say we're going to talk about this fascinating halacha that when there's what's called a chupas nida, so a chassan and kala are getting married and the kala is a nida, so obviously they're unable to have relations because she's a nida. But not only that, there's actually an isser yichud. They're not allowed to be alone with each other. Incredible halakha. They're married, they're husband and wife. They're not allowed to be alone with each other. What are we concerned about? We're concerned that in the excitement of being married, they're going to end up having relations. Right? And of course, having relations with a woman who is a nida is an isser kares, a very serious transgression. So therefore, Chazal said if it's a chupas nida, she's a nida at the time of the chuppah. So they get married. Again, they're married, right? But husband and wife, but they can't be miyachid. They can't be alone with each other. Incredible. And ultimately, again, halacha l'maisa. And Abba said this seems to go back on avelos. Even during avelos, we allow a kala all of the jewelry and all of the cosmetics she needs in order to look and to feel beautiful. Bryce adds in one more piece. And also we're going to see Bia Rishona, the first act of relations, should not occur on an Erev Shabbos, a Friday, or for that matter again on a Matzeh Shabbos. The reason for that we'll see in Meretz Hashem in Monday's daf. Amar Mar, Hu Yashem bein ha'anoshim, Hi Yashem bein ha'anoshim. We said before that Allah Chalamai, so what? The husband sleeps with the men, she sleeps with the women, i.e. they can't have yichud, they can't be alone with each other. Mesele Rabbi Yochanan, I will say this supports the position of Rabbi Yochanan. What does Rabbi Yochanan say? Then Rabbi Yochanan, Af api sha'amru ein avelus b'moed. Rabbi Yochanan says like this, even though there is no concept of avelus on a yomtiv. On a yomtiv. Right, to both say. So again, this goes back to what we were saying before. Remember, our application of this is as follows, which is that halacha l'maisa, once a chassan and kala get married, their sheva brachas have the status of a yomtiv, of a regel. Now, we don't know where that's from or why that is. We're just taking that as fact right now. So I will say, because it's a yomtiv, therefore what? Avelos, the laws of mourning, can't devolve upon that 7-day period. Right? It's actually very much the same if a person encounters a loss over Yom Tiv. Right? There's no Avelos over Yom Tiv. But yet Rabbi Yochanan points out something very interesting. When we say there's no Avelos during Sheva Brachas, because Sheva Brachas ultimately again is a Yom Tiv, is a regel for the Chassan and Kala, that only applies to external displays of mourning. But private displays of mourning are absolutely in effect. The Gemara Saval Dvarim Shal Tzina Noheg. Private displays. They both say, what are the private displays of mourning? Well, most notably over here is marital relations. Over the course of Shiva, one is not permitted to have marital relations. So what do you see from here? That even though halacha l'maisa, we're going to allow the chassan and kala to get married, and we're going to allow Bia Rishona, ultimately, again, they then have to separate. He sleeps with the men, she sleeps with the women. Women, why? Why? Because halacha l'maisa, the private displays of mourning still apply during this time. Now, again, right now what we're assuming is this time refers to the 14 days, refers to 7 days of Sheva Brachas and 7 days of Avelos. And it sounds like they have to be apart all 14 days. We're assuming now that's because Dvarim Shebet Sina, private displays of mourning. So says the Gemara, Darash Rav Yosef beid Rav Mishmei de Rava. So Rav Yosef, the son of Rava, darshan in the name of his father. Lo shanu ela shelo baal. I will say, when is this so? In other words, lo shanu, Rashi says that they're not allowed to be alone. When do we say that there's an isser yichud? Chassan and kala can't be alone with each other when there wasn't an initial act of relations. Aval baal ishta yishena imo. So I will say, when do we say ultimately again that halacha l'maisa there's an isser yichud upon a chassan and kala? That's only if they never consummated their relationship. But once they consummate their relationship, there is no isser yichud. Remember, says 1 second. Remember, what's the case? The case is, let's keep it easy. Father of the chassan dies. So what day of the wedding? What's the halacha? They get married, right? Put the mace in a room, go to the chuppah, bia rishona, and then they separate. So the Gemara says, so Rava says over here that what? If they had bia, they don't have to separate. But that's our case. Our case is they had bia rishona, they had bia, and yet we're still saying that they're obligated to separate. So what's going on over here? So the Gemara says, Ki ka'amar apirsa ishtonido. No. Incredible. The Gemara says, no. When the Brisa said before that he sleeps with the men, she sleeps with the women, what is that referring to? That's referring to the case where the woman becomes a nida at the chuppah. When I say at the chuppah, I don't literally mean at the chuppah, going into the chuppah. So she's a nida at the time of the chuppah. Oh, so if she's a nida at the time of the chuppah, then what? Then halacha lemaisa, there's an iser yichud, as we said before. Chassan and kala then can't be secluded with each other, right? That's when we say he sleeps with the men, she sleeps with the women, i.e. an iser yichud. The Gemara says, 1 second, but that's not what the Brisa says. The Brisa says, v'chein katani. See, Rabbi said, what's interesting about this is the case of nida is mentioned as an add-on. In other words, the Brisa makes the statement, he sleeps with the men, she sleeps with the women, and that statement is made in conjunction with the case of avelos. Then the case of nida is added on afterwards. So what's going on? The chein katani, we'll say dalid amud beis 4b. What incredible Gemara. So hachikar, what it means to say, v'chein misha pirsa ishto nida. If a man's wife becomes a nida, so Rabbi say velo baal. See, here's the case. If you have what we call in halacha a chupas nida, the woman is a nida at the time of the chuppah. So remember again, they get married, but they're unable to consummate their relationship. Because they're unable to consummate their relationship, we don't allow them to be alone with each other out of concern that they will be intimate with each other, which is aser mid'araisa. Therefore, the Gemara says, "Velo ba'al hu yashem bein hanashim ve'ishto yishena bein hanashim." Good. So Rabbi says that's the halacha. So Rabbi say now the Gemara is kind of reinventing the Brisa a little bit. And here's what we're saying. The way we're reading it right now is like this: 2 cases. Case number 1 is a case of avelos. Father of the chassan dies on the day of the wedding. Let's go through the steps. Step 1, put the mace in a room. Step 2, chuppah. Right? Step 3, bury the dead. Or whatever. Step 4, bia rishona. Now what we're saying, I will say, is like this. Once there's bia rishona, so chassan and kala, then they have 7 days of sheva brachas, 7 days of avelos. But they're allowed to be with each other. In other words, when I say be with each other, in other words, there's no isri yichud. There's no problem for them to be alone with each other. Right? To both say, then the Brisa introduces another case. The other case is Reuven is marrying Rachel, and the day of the wedding, Rachel becomes a nida, and therefore they go to the chuppah, they get married, but halacha lemaisa, there's an iser yichud. A man is not allowed, because they've never had relations. And this is very important, remember, because they've never yet had relations, they've never consummated their relationship, Chazal said they can't be alone with each other out of concern that they will consummate that relationship be'isr, in a prohibited fashion. So therefore, what's the halacha by nida? He sleeps with the men, she sleeps with the women, and that's it. Ultimately, again, until she's able to go to the mikvah, become tahor, and go on. But obviously, it goes without saying, this doesn't apply, of course, to a regular situation where every month a woman becomes a nida. And again, we'll talk about this. The logic is because the husband and I have already been together, and he knows that she is going to become permitted to him in just a few days' time from now. This is a very specific case where they're getting married, she's a nida, they have never been able to consummate their relationship with each other. So therefore Chazal said in that case, Isser Yichud, they can't be alone until she's able to go to the mikvah. So the Gemara says something very interesting, Lememra, da'avelos kila leminida. Then Rabbi say, what do you see from here? You see from here that halacha l'maisa, that I'm sorry. We'll say. Let me go back. Excuse me. I said that incorrectly. So I will say the Gemara is saying like this. The Gemara is saying that by avelos, by both avelos and nida, there's an iser yichud. This is the conclusion. The Gemara is not conclusion, but this is the stage. At this point, the way the Gemara's understanding is like this: both by avelos as well as by chupas nida, there is an Isser Yichud. There's an Isser Yichud, right? So again, Reuven's father dies the day of the wedding, put the mace in a room, Chassan and Kala go to the chuppah, Bia Rishona. After Bia Rishona, they separate. 14 days, he's with men, she's with the women, fine. So too, if there's a chupas nida, ultimately again, they get married, Obviously, they can't consummate their relationship from after the marriage until she's able to go to the mikvah. He's with the men, she's with the women. Good. Lememra da avelos kila laminida. Now, what's interesting about this is as follows. It sounds like from here that avelos, the laws of avelos, are treated more lightly than the halachos of nida. Now, I will say, where does the Gemara get this from? Because listen to this. By hilchos nida, as we just said, if a couple had relations, right? Let's just play this out. Reuven marries Rachel. Reuven marries Rachel. They have Bia Rishona. They have the first act of relations. 2 days later, she becomes the nida. Is there an Isser Yichud? Are they prohibited from being alone with each other? The answer, of course, is no. No. Yet by Avelos, even though they had Bia Rishona, they still have to separate afterwards. Which sounds like the Gemara is saying is that people treat the halachos of Avelos with a lesser degree of stringency. There would be more lax with the halachos of Avelos than they would be with the halachos of Nida. So therefore, even in Avelos, even though husband and wife have already been intimate with each other, they still have to separate afterwards. Whereas by Nida, after the couple's been with each other, there's no Isser Yichud during Nida anymore. To which the Gemara said, but is that true? Vaha Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Chanina Amar Ravuna, Kamalacho she'isha osa labayla, Nida osa labayla. So let's listen to this in general, and we're going to get into this sugya actually later on in Samech Aleph, about the responsibilities that a wife has towards her husband. It's going to be an interesting sugya, obviously, because a lot of these quote-unquote responsibilities are also reflective of certain societal norms, which, when we see the Gemara, have clearly changed. Right? But let's just read it for now. Any malachas, any work that a wife normally does for her husband, or even a woman who's a nida is able to do for her husband. Right? We'll see what that entails with certain exceptions. What are the exceptions? Chutz memizigas hakos, she cannot pour him his cup of wine. V'atzas hamita, when a woman is a nida, she can't make his bed. V'archatzas panav yadav raglov, nor can she go ahead and wash his face, his hands, and his feet. I guess normally that does occur. So she can't do that when she's a nida. And I will say, what's the logic of these things? Because these are things that can lead to intimacy. Pouring a cup of wine, making a bed, of course, washing her husband. These are all things that can lead to intimacy. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, when a woman is a nida, she can't do these things. V'ilu, listen to this. Yet v'ilu gabi avelos tanya, Rabbi said by avelos, what did we see? Afa pisha amru ein adam rashay lakafes ishtalios kochalios pokesas. Even though during avelos, a man cannot force his wife to go ahead and apply makeup. Kocheles and pokeses are different forms of cosmetics. Rashi says, pokeses is ma'averes straka paneh, like putting blush, that's pokeses. And ultimately, again, kocheles is like eye makeup. So during avelos, a husband can't compel his wife to go ahead and do these things. Be'emes amru, however, during avelos, what can happen? Be'emes amru, mozeges lo hakos, she can pour him a cup of wine. Umatzas lo hamita, she can make his bed. Umarchatzes lo panav yadav veraglov, and she can wash his hands, his face, and his feet during Avelos. So we'll say, what do you see from here? So when she's a nida, she can't pour his cup of wine. She can't go ahead and make his bed, and she can't wash him. But in Avelos, she could do all of those things. So I will say, what does that seem to tell you? That seems to tell you that people treat avelos with greater stringency. Because the fact that she could do those things, I will say, is we're not concerned it's going to lead to intimacy. Why? Because people treat the halachos of avelos with a certain sense of stringency and urgency. And therefore, even if a wife does these things for her husband, they're not going to come to be intimate. Yet, by hilchos nida, if we allow her to do these things for her husband, there's the possibility of intimacy. So you see from here that the halachos of avelos are actually treated with greater stringency and urgency than the halachos of nida. So let's go over to Lokashia. Says, no, apples and oranges. Lokashia, kan ba'avelos didei, kan ba'avelos dida. Remember again, we're talking about two different types of avelos. One is talking about a situation of where the man is the avel, and one is talking about the situation of where the woman is the avel. Why is there a distinction? Look at Rashi. Kan ba'avelos today la'olam avelos kila leminida. In reality, Avelos, people treat Avelos, the laws of mourning, with a certain level of leniency, much more lenient than they treat the laws of Nida. V'hani masnisa hachi metarson, hadik tani la'el hu yoshem bein ha'anoshim ba'avelos didei. Rabbi said this is fascinating. So beforehand, right, in the earlier brisa, where it talks about during Avelos that he has to sleep with the men, she has to sleep with the women, Rabbi say, who is that talking about? That's where the man is an Avel. This is fascinating. If he's the one in Avelos, we're concerned that if they're sleeping in the same room together, he's going to be intimate with her. Because a man will generally take certain shortcuts, right? We're nervous. If he's the Avel, we're nervous that he may be lenient in his Avelos. Conversely, halacha lemaisa, when we allow, right, the woman to go ahead and pour the cup, make the bed, and wash his hands and feet, right, during Avelos, that's ultimately when she's in Avelos. Because if the wife is in Avelos, we know that a wife is going to be very midakdekes, very careful with the halachos of her Avelos, and even if the husband wants to be intimate, she's going to say no. So I must say, this is like pretty mind-blowing, because now what it's saying is, we're trying to look at this as like a comparison between Nida and Avelos. Like which one do people treat more stringency, more leniently? The truth is, obviously, the halachos of Nida, people treat more stringently. That's for sure. First of all, because Nida's Doraisa, Avelos we're going to see is mostly Dirabanan. And again, Nida's Kares, Avelos is not. But here the interesting distinction is going to be who is the Avel? If the man is an Avel, that's ultimately, again, we're going to tell husband and wife to sleep separately. Because we're concerned that maybe he's still going to want to be intimate. And again, she's not in Avelos, so maybe she'll acquiesce to his wishes. But Lamaisa, when she's in Avelos, there's no concern that something's going to happen, since a woman is careful and meticulous with halacha. Pretty incredible. Says the Gemara, one second, but one second. But the Brisa said before, when it spoke about, again, husband and wife not sleeping with each other after, right, during Avelos, ultimately, again, it said whether it's the father of the chassan or the mother of the kala. So it didn't seem to make a distinction between who is in mourning. Ki katani asha'ara. No. That was stated with the rest of the halachas. But I will say, apparently what the Gemara seems to be saying over here is that halacha l'maisa, when it comes to sleeping separately, that's only if the husband is in Avelos. If he's the one who's the Avel. But if it's the wife who's in Avelos, ultimately, again, halacha l'maisa, they would not be obligated to sleep separately. Pretty incredible. To which the Gemara says, one second. Umi shayni ben Avelos didei la Avelos didan. Do we do that? Do we actually make a distinction, halacha, between his Avelos and her Avelos? Is there really such a thing like that? Vatanya, we learned. Mishemes chamav o chamoso. Rabbi say, if someone's father, say Reuven's married to Rachel, and Reuven's father-in-law or mother-in-law passed away, so Rachel's parent passed away. The halacha is, Reuven can't compel his wife to go ahead and put on cosmetics, or to go ahead and to color her eyes, or to put on blush. He can't do that. He can't compel her. He can say to her, but you're my wife, I want you to look beautiful for me. No, she's in Avelos. See, he can't compel her to go ahead and put on something to make herself look beautiful for him. Ella, not only that, rather, what does he do? Ella, kofe mitasa v'noig ima Avelos. Rather, Rabbi say, what's the halacha? The halacha is, he observes Avelos along with her. He overturns his bed. Remember, again, we saw this in Moed Katan. Kfiyas Hamita, overturning the bed, was one of the morning practices. We don't do this anymore today for a variety of reasons. But halacha l'maisa, what the Gemara is saying over here, not only can he not compel her to go ahead and put on makeup, but he has to observe Avelos alongside of her. V'chein shemes chamea o chamosa. Similarly, again, Rachel, let's say Reuven's father or mother passed away. What's the halacha? Ein lo rasha lios kocheles lios pokeses. She should not put on her makeup. Ela kofe mitasa v'noheges imo Avelos. Rather, what does she do? She overturns her bed and she observes Avelos along with her husband. So Rabbi say, what do you see from here? You see, when it comes to halachos of Avelos, we don't really distinguish between who's the Avel. He's the Avel, she's the Avel. Lemaisa, again, it almost sounds like from here that when one of them is in Avelos, then what? Both of them are in Avelos. To which the Gemara says, Tani ba'Avelos didei hu yashen bein ha'anoshim v'ishto yeshena bein ha'anoshim. Shavuot said, the Gemara says, you have to rewrite the Brisa. And what the Brisa really means to say is ba'Avelos didei. When do we say that there's an obligation for the husband and wife to sleep separately? That's when the husband is in avelos. Because we're concerned that even though he's in avelos, he may still want to be intimate with his wife. So he sleeps with the men, she sleeps with the women. The Gemara says, "I baha v'chein katani," but it says, "and so," right? Sounds like it's including both cases. Ki katani akicho va'apirkos. That's referring to putting on makeup. I baha imo katani. So I will say it says that she is with him. My love imo bamita. Does it not mean that they can sleep together? To which the Gemara says, "Lo imo babayis." Then Abba said what it means is like this: when she is with him in the home, what does this mean? Uchida amar le Rav lechia berei. Abba say as Rav said to Chia his son. Listen to this: Lo tinog avelusa. I'm sorry. Ba'apa nohog avelusa. De lo ba'apa lo tinog avelusa. So Abba says it's actually very interesting. There is a halacha, so again, there's a lot of stuff going on over here. So going back just a moment. So this concept that when one spouse is in avelos, the other spouse is in avelos as well, when does that apply? That only applies in the presence of the spouse. So we'll say Reuven's married to Rachel, Rachel's mother dies. So now there's a halacha that says that when Reuven is in the presence of Rachel, he has to observe mourning practices to mirror his wife's. But when he's not in her presence, there is no such obligation. The truth is, Rabbi say we don't do this contemporarily because contemporarily we assume that there's a presumed mechila, that ultimately the avel is mochel, the mourner is okay. So Rachel is mocheles. She says, Reuven, I don't need you to observe this avelos in my. Thank you, but I don't need you to do it. So that's why if you've never heard of this, it's because it's not done today. But in any event, the point is halacha lemaisa. Even the concept of observing avelos in the presence of one's spouse is literally only in the presence of one's spouse. But outside of the presence of one's spouse, one is not obligated to do so. To which the Gemara says, Rav Ashi Amar, mi kamedamis avelusa dahacha la avelusa da'alma. So now we'll say, now the Gemara says, one second. Comes along Rav Ashi, and Rav Ashi says, what are you doing? We have a very specific case we're dealing with, right? We'll say, how did this whole thing begin? This whole thing began, Reuven's going to marry Rachel. On the day of the wedding, Reuven's father or Rachel's mother dies, right? That's the case we're dealing with. And now you're taking that case and you're lumping it together with all of Hilchos Avelos, to which comes along Rav Ashi and says, how can you compare it? Listen to this. Avelusa da'alma chamir v'lo asil zazulebe. I will say in general, people are careful with Avelos, and they're not going to take liberties with the halacha. And therefore, again, we allow a husband and wife to sleep together in the same room, to have yichud. Again, they're not allowed to be intimate, because intimacy is prohibited during Avelos. But we allow them to be alone with each other. We're not concerned they're going to be intimate, because people are vigilant about the halachos of Avelos. There's something different happening in our case. Avelos tahacha, so I'll say in our case, what's our case? Reuven and Rachel are about to get married. Reuven's father dies. So what do we do? Remember, let's go through the process. Take Reuven's father, take the body, put it in a room. Take Reuven and Rachel to the chuppah, Bia Rishona, bury the dead, Bia Rishona, right? Sheva brachas, and then 7 days of Avelos. This is where we're concerned. Watch this. Avelo dahacha, kevan da'akilu rabbanon asil zalzulebe. I will say, since we are already being lenient with the laws of Avelos in this case, the concern is once the halacha has been lenient, Reuven and Rachel may take certain liberties as well, and may be intimate with each other over the course of the Avelos. So my kula, what's the kula over here? Ilema diktani boel bi'ilas mitzvu poresh. But say, if you see, what's the kula? The kula maybe is that even though Reuven lost his father, we let them go to the chuppah, and they have Bia Rishona, right? They have Bia Rishona. So maybe, is that the kula, that we allow them to have that first act of relations? That's not a kula. I'll tell you why. You know why we allow them to say that's a technical issue? Mishum delochal alav avelusa. Rabbi say, remember again, and this is fascinating. Why are Reuven and Rachel allowed to get married? Let's play this out, right? Let's go with the case of the Mishnah. It's a Wednesday. Reuven and Rachel are about to get married. Reuven's father dies. So now what's the halacha? We put the mace in a room, take Reuven and Rachel to the chuppah. How can you do that? Just technically, how could I do that? Isn't Reuven an avel? So we'll say there's something amazing. Reuven is not an avel. Watch this. Mishum delochal alav avelusa. Rabbi say Reuven is not an avel, Because Avelos actually only devolves upon a person at one of two stages. Listen to this. Ilu Rabbi Eliezer, Ad Sheitzimi Pesach Habayis. According to Rabbi Eliezer, the stage of Avelos only begins when the mace, the corpse, is removed from the home. Or Ilu Rabbi Yoshua, Ad Sheyistom HaGolel, until the grave is filled in. So Rabbi said, this is actually quite interesting. And that's why, now you understand, this is why we delay burial. So what we do is we put the mace, now that even the terminology makes sense. We put the mace in a room. Putting the mace in a room means what? You don't take the mace out of the house. Put the mace in a room, leave the mace there. We're not taking the mace out of the house, we're not burying. Therefore what? The status of Avel, right, the state of Avelos does not devolve upon Ruvain. So Ruvain is technically allowed to get married, allowed to have the Bia Rishona. Then we bury. Now remember again, once there's chuppah, once there's Bia Rishona, he's in Sheva Brachas. Once he's Sheva Brachas, now we bury, but because he's in his own Yom Tiv, right, because Sheva Brachas is like a regel, Avelos cannot devolve upon him now. It has to wait until Sheva Brachas is over. So what's the kula? Elo diktani noeg shivas yemei hamishta, v'achar kach noeg shivas yemei Avelos. Rather, I will say, what's the kula? So the kula seems to be the fact that halacha l'maisa, we don't just let them get married. And we don't just let them go ahead and have Sheva Brachas, but rather, what do we allow? We don't just let them have chuppah, and we don't just let them have the Bia Rishona, we give them Sheva Brachas. Shabbos say, this is where we're concerned, that halacha l'maisa, in a case like this, if Reuven and Rachel are alone with each other, they may come to have relations even over the course of the Bia. So Shabbos say, if we pull this together now, we'll see the halacha l'maisa Meretz Hashem in Monday's daf, but if we kind of pull this together now, here's what we have on a basic level. Let's first take Nida out of the question over here. If there's a chuppah's Nida, Rachel becomes a Nida on the day of her wedding. So you can still get married, the chuppah is effective, halacha, right? Chuppah, fine. What can't they have? Obviously no Bia because she's a Nida. And because they can't have Bia, there's also an Isser Yichud. Chassan and Kala are not permitted to be with each other. They're not permitted to be with each other, right? Because halacha l'maisa, again, we're concerned that they may come to be intimate with each other. When could they be alone? When she goes to the mikvah, then they're able to have bia, then there's no Isser Yichud. And I will say, obviously, again, that Isser Yichud is only in a case where they're married, but they've never had bia. Once a couple has bia, there's no Isser Yichud every single time the woman becomes a nida. Good. We'll see, what about Hilchos Avelos? Normally during Hilchos Avelos, when a man or a woman becomes an Avel, what's the halacha? So again, there's no Isser Yichud. We allow a couple to be alone with each other, and we know that they're going to honor the halacha, and they're not going to be intimate with each other over the case of Avelos. So what's the outlier case? The outlier case is Reuven and Rachel are supposed to get married. It's a Wednesday. Reuven's father dies. So now we have an issue. Put the mace in a room. So right, therefore, no Avelos yet. Go to the chuppah. Bia Rishona. The concern now is, in this case, the Gemara says after the Bia Rishona, they're not allowed to be with each other. There's an Isser Yichud. And what's the concern? Because since effectively we've allowed certain leniencies. Now again, we have allowed a leniency. First of all, we're delaying the burial, which by itself is a leniency. But more than that, we're actually giving them Sheva Brachas. Even though Reuven just buried his father, he's still going to get Sheva Brachas. We're concerned that halacha l'maisa, since there are leniencies over here, if we allow them to be together, they're going to be intimate with each other as well. Therefore, the halacha is for those days. And I will say what it sounds like now, by the way, kol osan hayamin, kol osan, Rashi said on Amud Aleph, is 14 days. The days of Sheva Brachas and the days of Shiva, they are obligated to be separated from one another. Hu yashin bein ha'anoshim, hu yishanis bein ha'anoshim. He sleeps with the men, she sleeps with him. But again, Rabbi say, that's not a general din in Avelos, just a din in this particular out of the ordinary circumstance. Right? Rabbi say, shkoyach, we'll stop over here. We're going to continue with this sugya Meretz Hashem on Monday. We'll see some interesting halacha l'maisa on Monday as well. Again, I'm sorry that I couldn't be there with you in person, but such an incredible source to continue to learn with each of you. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, and shkoyach.